Hey, have you seen those TikToks everywhere lately?
Which ones? There's always something going viral.
The ones claiming that like your fancy Hermes or Prada bag, maybe even Louis Vuitton, is actually secretly made in China.
Ah, yes. Those have been making waves. Huge view counts.
Seriously, I saw one mention over 10 million views. It's wild.
Yeah, it's definitely got people talking. And looking through the sources you gathered, news articles, industry takes, it's clear people want to know what's really up.
Exactly. So that's our mission for this deep dive,
Good.
right? To kind of unpack all these claims.
Precisely. Look into the whole luxury manufacturing thing, figure out what's fact, what's maybe fiction, based on everything you've pulled together.
Yeah, because if you're interested in this stuff, you want the real story, not just the clickbait. These claims definitely grab attention, but what's the actual deal with these big luxury brands?
Okay, so let's start with the claim itself.
Right. What was the main thing they were saying on TikTok?
So the central claim, it seems, came from an account called SendBags2. They put out this video saying, get this, 80% of luxury bags are really made in China.
80%.
Yeah, and the idea was that they're basically like almost finished there, and then they just get repackaged somewhere else, slap a logo on, and boom, luxury price tag.
Huh. And that video,
Interestingly, that original video was actually taken down.
okay, 80%, that just sounds massive. Makes you really question those made-in labels. So where do these brands actually say they make their stuff? Let's start with, like, the icon, Hermes.
Right, Hermes. They're pretty explicit about it. Their bags are made in France, period. They
Okay.
have workshops, atelier in different parts of France, Bretagne, near Paris, the Ardennes region, Lyon, Normandy.
And it's not like they just churn them out, is it? I always hear about the craftsmanship.
Oh, absolutely not. We're talking 15 to maybe 40 hours for one bag.
Wow.
And for the really iconic ones, the Birkin, the Kelly, the artisans train for years, sometimes up to 5 years before they're even allowed to make one.
5 years.
Yeah. Plus, they control quality tightly. They have their own tanneries for leather, and each bag has these artisan codes stamped inside showing the year, the workshop. It's serious stuff. Authentication is built in, sort of.
That really shows a deep commitment to that French identity. Okay, what about some other big names? Prada, Miu Miu, Saint Laurent, they're huge too.
Prada and its sister brand, Miu Miu, their handbags are made in Italy. Prada has this big complex, Valvigna, in Tuscany. That's a major hub for their handbag making.
Okay, Italy for Prada.
In Saint Laurent. Mostly France and Italy as well. They actually have a leather goods facility down in that same Tuscan district where Gucci and Dior also have factories. It's kind of a luxury hub there.
So, based on where they physically have their factories and workshops, this idea of 80% being made in China seems, well, unlikely for these specific top brands.
It does seem to clash with their stated operations, yes.
But what about the labels themselves? Made in Italy, made in France? Are there rules about who gets to use those?
Oh, definitely. There are regulations. In the U.S., for example, to say made in USA, the standard is all or virtually all,
Inning.
meaning basically everything, parts, processing, labor has to be from the U.S. And the final assembly, too. No major stuff done elsewhere.
Okay, pretty strict. What about Europe, especially France and Italy, since they're so protective of luxury?
You're right, they are.
Okay.
The EU has general rules, Regulation 95220, the teen, I think it is. But France and Italy, they have their own stricter guidelines on top of that to protect their luxury and artisan sectors.
How strict?
Well, for Made in Italy, the key phrase is last substantial transformation.
What does that actually mean in practice?
It generally means the main defining part of the manufacturing process happened in Italy. So imagine components come from elsewhere, but the key assembly, the thing that really makes it the final product, happens in Italy. It can get technical, but that's the gist.
Okay. And made in France? Similar idea.
Similar principle, yes.
Yeah.
Last substantial transformation has to be in France. But many French brands, Hermes being a prime example, go way beyond that minimum.
How so?
They often ensure that, like, everything design, sourcing materials, cutting, sewing, finishing, it's all done in France. There's even a tougher certification, Origin France Guarantee.
OFG.
Yeah, that requires the product's essential characteristics to be created in France, and at least 50% of the unit cost has to come from French operations. So, much stricter.
Okay, so with these regulations, especially in France and Italy, it really does sound improbable that these specific high-end brands are making 80% of their bags in China and just, I don't know, sewing on a label in Europe.
The math doesn't seem to add up based on the rules and the brand's stated practices for their top lines.
So if that's the case, why are these TikToks getting so much traction? Where's this idea coming from?
Well, that leads us to a whole other side of this story, which is the counterfeit market, particularly in China.
Ah, the fakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the scale is just staggering. In 2024, U.S. Customs seized counterfeit and pirated goods, and nearly 90% of the value of those seizures originated from China and Hong Kong.
90%.
90%. And within China itself, counterfeit luxury goods are incredibly common.
Why China specifically? How did it become such a huge center for this?
It's kind of complex, tied into its economic history.
Yeah.
After the reforms in 1978, China rapidly became the world's workshop, right?
Yeah.
Lots of global brands moved manufacturing there for lower costs.
Right.
This built up huge manufacturing capabilities. But sometimes the supply chain regulation wasn't quite as tight. This created an environment where it became easier, relatively speaking, for some factories to also produce counterfeits alongside legitimate goods, or just focus on fakes. Even with anti-counterfeit laws, the sheer scale of manufacturing made it a challenge.
So the capability was there, almost like a side effect of becoming a manufacturing giant.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And then you layer on the rise of brand culture within China.
Yeah.
Since the 90s, Western luxury stores started opening, and those brands became huge status symbols.
Okay.
Counterfeits offered a shortcut to that status,
Yeah.
access to the look without the massive price tag. This just fueled demand, both for real luxury and for the fakes.
Interesting. So who's buying these fakes in China? Is it just people trying to fool others?
It's actually a pretty diverse group. Sure, some buyers might get duped. They don't realize it's fake, but a lot of people knowingly buy counterfeits.
Really?
Yeah, you've got like middle-class consumers maybe looking for that social status boost.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are people who could maybe afford the real thing, but think the authentic prices are just way too high, unjustified. They see the fake as better value.
So status, price, maybe even a little bit of sticking it to the brands?
Part of it for some, yeah.
What kind of fakes are most common? Still handbags.
Handbags are huge, definitely. Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Prada, you name it. They often come with fake receipts, even fake customs documents to look more legit.
Wow.
But it's also big in electronics. Sneakers, think Nike, Adidas clothing, and luxury watches like Rolex or Cartier. Pretty much anything with a desirable logo.
Okay, so massive counterfeit scene in China. Now, how does TikTok fit back into this? Because that's where this recent explosion happened.
All right, this is where things get kind of interconnected and maybe a bit murky. The U.S.-China trade war and the tariffs that came with it, sometimes really high, like 145% on some goods.
Yeah, I remember that.
That seems to have, perhaps unintentionally, pushed some Chinese manufacturers or sellers towards using platforms like TikTok for direct-to-consumer marketing, especially targeting Western audiences.
How so?
They can offer these items, often lookalikes or maybe even high-quality fakes, at super low prices, basically saying, hey, buy direct from us, skip the middleman, skip the tariffs.
Ah, the same factory claim.
Exactly. Some sellers literally claim their stuff comes from the exact same factories making products for brands like Lululemon or Louis Vuitton. They pitch it as getting the same quality without the brand markup and the import duties.
But is that actually true? Can they legally do that?
Well, most experts are highly skeptical. People like Daniel Langer, who studies luxury strategy, basically say these claims are misleading or just plain false. Because legitimate factories working for major brands sign strict agreements, NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. They're usually forbidden from selling branded goods directly. And the brands themselves, Lululemon, Hermes, they've denied these specific factory claims when asked.
Okay, that makes sense. So the TikToks pushing this are likely selling, well, fakes. Maybe very good fakes, but still fakes. Or unauthorized items.
That appears to be the most plausible explanation, yes. High-quality counterfeits or dupes being marketed cleverly.
Is the Chinese government doing anything about this huge counterfeit market, though? Are they trying to crack down?
They have been, especially in recent years. Since around 2018, the main regulatory body, the State Administration for Market Regulation, has reportedly increased efforts against counterfeit production and sales.
Like how?
Stricter penalties for online platforms if they don't cooperate or if they don't protect trademark rights. And there was a new e-commerce law in 2019 specifically designed to curb counterfeits with bigger fines and making platforms more responsible for policing sellers, even on social media.
Have platforms like Taobao cleaned up their act? I remember they used to have a reputation.
They've definitely tried. Alibaba, Taobao's parent, now talks about a zero-tolerance policy. They've invested in things like an anti-counterfeiting alliance with brands, using AI tools to detect fakes. Pinduoduo, another big platform, also face criticism and has apparently partnered with brands and offers refunds if people unknowingly buy fakes.
So progress online, maybe?
So some progress, yes, but counterfeiters are slippery.
How do they get around it?
They adapt. They might use redirects to other websites, misspell brand names slightly, use vague descriptions, or list things at super high prices, but then offer huge discounts in private chats, if you ask. It's a constant cat and mouse game.
And what about offline? Are there still physical fake markets?
Oh, yeah. Despite crackdowns, you can still find physical markets selling fakes pretty openly in big cities like Shanghai and Beijing. Enforcement seems to ebb and flow, often targeting bigger fish, not every small stall.
Always finding a way. I've heard about services now that, like, authenticate luxury goods. Are those a thing in China?
Yes, definitely. With so many fakes floating around, people are worried about getting ripped off. So authentication services have become quite popular.
Like who?
A major one is Duwu, which is also known internationally as Poison. They authenticate sneakers, streetwear, luxury goods. They use experts, AI analysis, things like that. They even try to control the supply chain by sourcing directly and issuing authenticity certificates.
Interesting. A whole industry built around verifying the real deal. So what are the actual luxury brands doing to fight back against all this, especially the stuff coming from China?
They use a mix of strategies. There's the traditional stuff, protecting their trademarks, working with customs to seize fakes at borders, monitoring shops. But those have limits, especially with online sales and demand within China itself.
Right, hard to stop it all.
So now they're also looking at tech solutions. Blockchain is a big buzzword.
How would that work?
The idea is to give each genuine item a unique, unchangeable digital record on a blockchain. Platforms like AURA, which involves LVMH, Prada Group, and Cartier's parent company, Richemont, are trying this. It creates a sort of digital passport for the item.
Does it work?
It has potential, but also challenges. Like, you have to make sure the initial data entered onto the blockchain is correct. And it really needs everyone in the supply chain to participate for it to be truly effective.
So tech helps, but maybe isn't a magic bullet. Are there other ideas, maybe shifting the focus?
Some analysts suggest that. The idea is, instead of just relying on the logo, brands should double down on what makes them unique. The really intricate craftsmanship, the heritage techniques, the quality that's incredibly hard to copy perfectly. Make the product itself the defense.
Focus on the art, not just the label. Makes sense.
Make the fakes look obviously inferior because they can't replicate the skill.
Okay, but back to these specific TikTok claims that went viral. How did the big brands like Hermes, Chanel, Louis Vuitton actually respond? Were they loud about refuting it?
Mostly silence.
Really? Silence.
Yeah, for the most part. It kind of goes against the usual crisis comms advice,
Yeah.
which is usually radical transparency, right? Get ahead of the narrative.
Exactly.
Hermes did give a statement to the New York Times saying, yep, 100% made in France. And some French luxury trade groups put out a paper about fighting disinformation. But it wasn't like a huge coordinated PR blast from the individual brands themselves. Many just declined to comment or didn't respond to media requests.
That seems risky, especially when millions are seeing claims that could hurt your brand image. Why stay quiet?
Well, there could be a few reasons. One, luxury has always relied on maybe a bit of mystique, carefully controlled stories. Talking openly about complex global supply chains might puncture that bubble a bit.
Okay, so it doesn't fit the brand narrative.
Potentially. Also, remember our chat about made-in labels? While the top lines might be made entirely in France or Italy, the rules can allow for components to be made elsewhere as long as that substantial transformation happens in Europe. Full transparency might reveal nuances they'd rather not highlight.
Like the sneaker example you mentioned, finished just by boxing it in Italy.
Exactly, that Bernstein analyst point. It's legally compliant, but maybe not the image they want to project. And sometimes transparency backfires.
How so?
There was that instance with Chanel trying to show their manufacturing to justify price hikes. Some viewers felt it looked too automated, too machine-made, which kind of undermined the whole handcrafted luxury vibe. So maybe silence feels safer.
But is it safe anymore with social media?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The old playbook might not work when algorithms can amplify any narrative, true or not, incredibly fast. Silence can look like hiding something.
Yeah, and like that commentator Brian Boy said, even rich people are on TikTok now. You can't just assume your target customer isn't seeing this stuff.
Precisely. The audience is everywhere. And then there's that other wrinkle, the theory from analyst Luca Solca at Bernstein.
What theory was that?
He suggested the timing and coordinated nature of some of these posts from Chinese influencers felt Well, possibly orchestrated, maybe even state-influenced, tied into geopolitical tensions.
Wow, okay. That adds a whole other layer. So potentially not just random TikToks.
There's a theory out there, adds complexity for sure.
I wonder how people in different places reacted to all this. Did everyone just believe the TikToks?
No, definitely varied reactions. We saw some examples from South Africa, for instance. One person, Thesha Niker, was pretty skeptical, citing the timing with the trade issues and the brand's long histories.
Okay, disbelief.
Another, Abigail Nedar Nepal, was more like, not worried, maybe it makes things more accessible. But then someone else, Asharia Parsad, was concerned, saying if it's marketed as made in France, it should be made in France, raising that transparency issue.
So a whole range. Skepticism, indifference, concern about honesty. What about the bigger picture, economically? What could these kinds of allegations do?
An economist, Sinisha Pakarisamy, pointed out several potential impacts. It could chip away at that prestige factor that lets brands charge high prices. That might dampen demand.
Right.
It could also boost the gray market. You know, real goods sold outside official channels, or even help domestic Chinese luxury brands if Western ones seem less authentic. Plus, those U.S. tariffs could still raise costs for brands using any Chinese components, leading to higher prices or lower profits. Even if the 80% claim is false, the perception could cause real shifts.
It's like a domino effect. You mentioned real fakes earlier. What exactly are those? Are they different from regular counterfeits?
Yeah, the term refers to those counterfeits that are just so good they're almost impossible to tell from the real thing, even for experts sometimes.
Hmm.
We're not talking about cheap knockoffs here.
Oh, good.
We're talking replicating materials, stitching, hardware, even things like date codes and serial numbers that used to be reliable ways to spot fakes. The quality has just improved dramatically over the years for some counterfeiters.
And that incredible quality, plus the high price of authentic goods. That's changing how people feel about buying fakes, isn't it?
It seems to be.
Yeah.
That Entropy survey finding that, what was it, 71% thought buying fakes was acceptable if the original is too expensive, that's significant. It suggests a growing number of consumers might be thinking, if the fake is this good and the real one costs a fortune, why not?
The value proposition starts to shift for some people.
Exactly. Especially if the quality difference becomes negligible to the average eye.
But there was that other interesting angle. Could these videos, even the misleading ones, actually help change the image of made in China?
Yeah, that's a fascinating, kind of ironic potential side effect. While spreading misinformation, the videos often show these modern, clean, sophisticated factories in China.
Right.
That could unintentionally counter some old, outdated stereotypes about Chinese manufacturing being low quality. People in places like Singapore, for example, who buy a lot via Chinese e-commerce, already know you can get high-quality goods from China.
Yeah.
These videos might bring that perception to a wider audience.
So, a weird silver lining maybe. Challenging stereotypes while pushing questionable claims. It all comes back to that basic question, though, doesn't it? Why buy the real thing anyway?
Ultimately, yeah. For many luxury consumers, it's not just about the label or where it was assembled. It's about the brand story, the heritage, the specific feel of the craftsmanship, the values they feel aligned with. A fake, however good, can't replicate that history or that feeling for someone who values it.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot. The core TikTok claim 80% of luxury bags made in China seems pretty inaccurate for the top-tier brands like Hermes, Prada, Louis Vuitton we discussed.
Yeah, based on their stated manufacturing, their workshop locations, and the stringent labeling rules in France and Italy, that specific claim seems largely unfounded for their main handbag lines.
But the whole situation is way more complicated than just that.
Absolutely. You've got this enormous, sophisticated counterfeit industry, primarily based in China, fueled by complex economic factors and consumer demand.
And that intersects with these viral marketing tactics, often playing on trade tensions, using platforms like TikTok in new ways.
Right. And it really highlights how much consumers are starting to care about transparency and origin. The silence from some brands in response, it definitely raises questions about how they navigate communication in this digital age where narratives spin out of control so fast.
So maybe a final thought for you listening to this. Considering everything we've talked about, the evolving image of made in China, the stunning quality of some real fakes, what does luxury actually mean to you? Is it purely about where something's made? Or is it more about the craft, the story, the feeling? Something beyond just the label and the price tag?
Hmm. Definitely something to think about. Where do you draw the line on value and authenticity?